Hello and welcome to an online event by Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. My name is Timur Umarov. I'm a fellow at Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center based in Berlin. And today I am pleased and honored and happy to be joined by my great colleagues to discuss the investment strategies of China and how China is adapting its investment strategy to Central Asia. This event is a part of Carnegie Asia program's multi-year project that is examining how China and Chinese actors respond to local demands and how China basically flexibly adapts to the realities in 7 global regions. And one of those regions is Central Asia. And today I am joined by Nargiza Murtalieva. She's a part-time associate professor at the American University of Central Asia. Also, Pan Yanlian. He's a research associate at James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, and Eunice Sharifli, non-resident fellow at China Global South Project. Welcome all. Thank you very much for making the time. Today's event, we were planning to focus on the economic part of China's presence in Central Asia. Around 2 weeks ago, we had another event that was focusing on China's soft and hard power in Central Asia, also under China Local Global Project. But today we're going to look at the financial instruments and how they differ from one country to another. We're going to also take a deeper dive into some of the aspects of economic presence of China in Central Asia, for example, in green energy or in production of uranium and but before that, I was planning to start with something a little broader with China's debt policy in Central Asia. And I want to start with you, Nargisa, since you have published a great piece that focused exclusively on the ways Chinese lending policies are adapting to Central Asia's realities. And my question to you to open up this discussion is how, in your view, Chinese financial players have adapted and used different models in their relationship with the Central Asian partners, and how would you say China demonstrates its flexibility as a lender?
Thank you, Timur, for your kind introductions and for this great initiative. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your question. Indeed, China is adaptive in issues of economic cooperation and allocation of loans, and it can choose the most appropriate way to manage the process of loan allocations and debt repayment. Relationships with Central Asian borrowers is ranked depending on the country, since Central Asian region is not homogeneous, and it is contingent on economic potential of the country, political regime, and amenability of political elites. Possible models may include a loan in exchange for resources, for instance, which is relevant for Kyrgyzstan or for Tajikistan mostly. It's about obtaining licenses for the extraction of resources and their further export. And it might be also relevant for Turkmenistan, given that Turkmenistan has already, as it had announced, has already repaid its debt to China, probably in exchange for gas resources. In the event of non-payment, a controlling stake in strategic enterprises or assets may be also transferred. Another option is deferred payment with interest, as exemplified by the case in Kyrgyzstan. And which is also interesting in recent years, I would add that China is also ready to form joint ventures for project co-financing, offering a practical approach to loan allocations that aligns with the interests of Central Asian elites. And in addition, debt obligations can be transformed into receiving certain preferences, such as exemption from taxes of Chinese enterprises, obtaining land leases, revision of labor quotas, and others. And one of the recent trends is another scheme or formula which has been proposed by Kyrgyzstan's president Sadir Japarov at the beginning of 2023. It's about a formula um, uh, that swap. So it means that Kyrgyzstan suggested that Bishkek can exchange its debt obligations for green projects. And if some European countries have already begun to sign new debt conversion agreements, then China hasn't still shown interest in this scheme. For instance, some Chinese experts, they recognize the debt swap formula for green projects to be original, but note the need to refine this initiative.
Yeah, this is actually very fascinating part of your piece about Kyrgyzstan President's Japarov idea to come up with this debt swap and to exchange, in a way, the debt that Bishkek has vis-a-vis China to green kind of projects. We will talk about green energy projects with Eunice a bit later, but I want to ask you, Nargiza, what are borrowers, Central Asian borrowers, have in common, and how they differ? You already said that Kyrgyzstan, for example, has this great idea to kind of deal with the problem of the Chinese debt. Do you also think that other Central Asian countries have kind of their own um, policies, their own strategies on how to repay the debt? So would you say there are things in common and unique features of these strategies among Central Asian countries?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. Since the issue of Chinese loans is ambiguous, it turned out to be quite easy for the elites to get them, but the return process involves difficult negotiations and is not subject to any relaxations or is difficult to restructure. Another key characteristic or common thing I would say is a lack of transparency. Details regarding debt obligations are often inaccessible or opaque, as seen in Turkmenistan, for example, or become available only after agreements are signed, which is relevant for Kyrgyzstan. And another key characteristic of Chinese government loans is their tight nature, requiring the use of Chinese labor, technology, and businesses. And these loans typically feature long repayment terms and inflexible schedules, creating opportunities for sometimes even non-economic influence and preferential treatment. When it comes to differences, I would refer again to economic potential, so we can somehow structure countries. And if to generalize, I would say that manageable situation is for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan due to its diversified foreign policy. And when it comes to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, these countries are more vulnerable in terms of repayment issues. Since, for instance, according to 2024, Tajikistan's main creditor again remains China, to which it owed about $900 million. And I would say probably that as a result, the next decade will demonstrate how the countries of the region manage their external obligations and whether Beijing is really ready for concessions or to transform these obligations into a sort of political influence.
Thank you, Nargiza. Now let's move on to the green energy, to the green projects that are financed by China, implemented by China in Central Asian countries. Eunice, you in your piece focused on specifically two countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And you explained the differences that China as a lender or as the implementator of different projects has in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So my question to you, what are the main differences that you have analyzed, that you have kind of figured out, and what does it tell us about China's adaptive strategy in Central Asia, specifically in the green energy sector?
So thank you very much, Taimur, for interesting question, and thank you very much also for having me. This is interesting webinar. So since 2018, we saw that, as you mentioned, the growing presence of China's in the renewable energy sector of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But actually, I will say in general Central Asia also, Central Asia, but Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is a special case. So there's a differences in and similarities in China's engagement with two countries. So if we start to talk with first differences, in terms of Kazakhstan, we saw that renewable energy cooperation between China and Kazakhstan start with intergovernment agreement in 2015, which Kazakhstan started to increase its demand and requirement from China's side to align its development project. And the project list, as 55 projects, already cover a range of wind and solar power projects. So we saw that in 2018, there's already realization of these projects in Kazakhstan. But in addition to that, I would say that main differences is here. Cooperation with Kazakhstan and China start with government-to-government relations, because when we look, engagement mechanism is very important. In Kazakhstan, we saw that it starts with government-to-government relations. However, in Uzbekistan, is quite different, because in green agenda or green diplomatic agenda between China and Uzbekistan start in 2021. But before 2021, we know that Uzbekistan has announced the tenders in 2019, renewable energy tenders, which is very important. And we already saw that Chinese companies engage and joined these renewable energy tenders and offer a range of competitive salary to win renewable energy projects. So main differences here in Uzbekistan, process start with more private sector driven or business to business driven rather than government to government relations. So I would say that this is the first differences. The second, the involvement of China's to this project is important, because in Kazakhstan, we saw that Chinese companies play a role as a project developer, because they have an agreement with Kazakhstan government or Ministry of Energy, and they also join Kazakhstan auctions and they win. That's why they are the main project developer, means that they design the project from start to end. However, in Uzbekistan, despite Chinese companies' involvement to tenders, they mostly failed to win, because the main winner of these tenders is Saudi Arabia's Aqua Power and United Arab Emirates Mastars, which is very important. So this means that Chinese companies needs to follow different strategy to engage with Uzbekistan. So in this context, we saw that even in Uzbekistan case, they failed to being the project developer. They started to engage with Aqua Power or Mastar, and they was chosen as an engineering, procurement, and construction contractor, or as an input supplier. So even they are not playing the critical role as a project developer, but they have still role as the vital role, because they provide the input supplier, and they play the key role in the realization of this project. This is the second differences between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. In addition to Uzbekistan, in order to bypass these renewable energy tenders, we saw that after 2019, after 2021, when two countries started to engage in the government level, Chinese companies started to communicate with Minister of Energy, and they directly signed renewable energy agreement with Uzbekistan. So they find a way to bypass the tenders and being also the project developer in Uzbekistan. And from my point of view, this is the most important two differences in China's engagement. And this is the final point that I will say. There's a one commonalities between the two countries. Even China's engagement is different, but both countries require localization from China, or transfer of some part of the know-how, or production of some component of renewable energy products in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But we saw that China agreed and accommodate their needs, and because last 2 years agreements shows that China not only signed or joined to realize this project, but they also agreed to localize, for example, production of wind blade or wind turbine or solar panels in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, or open research centers in order to cooperate for know-how. So there's a differences and similarities, but it shows that it's quite successful. That's why since 2019, we saw that dramatic increase actually in China's engagement in the renewable energy sector.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I have a question that might go a little beyond your piece, and tell me if it's something that you didn't have time to kind of look into. But I'm very interested. Why is it possible for Uzbekistan, for example, organize tenders with some competitiveness, and Kazakhstan is not doing it? Because from the outside, it seems that the strategy of having tenders and having different rival companies fighting for the project is kind of a better option for a hosting country to get the best out of the kind of situation. Why it's not happening with Kazakhstan? Is Kazakhstan, doesn't have that much of a attention of other investors rather than Chinese? What's in your view the matter with it?
Yep, that's a very interesting the point. Thank you very much for this. So I will say that, as you know, China and Kazakhstan partnership is going back to 1990s, but relations with Uzbekistan, I would say, particularly start to develop with China after 2016 when Shavkat Mirziyoyev came to power, particularly in the context of economy and investment or trade. So in Kazakhstan, we know that government-to-government relations with China is much stronger than Uzbekistan. So we saw that Chinese companies or Chinese side very easily can sign deal with the Kazakhstan side. But I wouldn't say that Kazakhstan didn't create competitive the system. Yes, Uzbekistan declared renewable energy tenders in 2019, but 2018 Kazakhstan also announced renewable energy auctions. This is also very important, because in these auctions we saw that Chinese companies also joined, particularly Universal Energy, the company of China, but also Western countries or local contractor of the Kazakhstan. But in Kazakhstan case, Chinese companies win these auctions. In Uzbekistan, due to the fast coming of the Masdar or Aqua Power, they already outcompete the Chinese counterpart. That's why they start to win, because they offer much better competitive price or offer in comparison with the Chinese companies. But in Kazakhstan, we saw that Chinese companies play a much important role, because there is last 1 year, I would say that Aqua and Masdar companies started to enter Kazakhstan market. So that's the differences or diversity in the market. In Kazakhstan, China's position is much stronger, and also the Aqua and Masdar is a latecomer, but in contrast, Uzbekistan, Aqua and Master is the first comer for the tender and much competitive offer. That's why China failed to win this tender. And both countries has a diversity, but just as I not mentioned it, Kazakhstan has already government-to-government relations. Uzbekistan put renewable energy cooperation after 2021, and both countries try to diversify the partnership actually. However, when we talk about renewable energy, we know that current leader is China in terms of technology, in terms of offering cost competitiveness. So China already has a comparative advantage, I would say.
Thank you. Very fascinating. Let's stick to Kazakhstan and talk about nuclear stuff. But I will come back to renewable energy and ask you, Eunice, about other countries because Central Asia is bigger than only Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Yanlan. Since and as Eunice have said, Kazakhstan is kind of economically more connected to China than Uzbekistan. Would you also say the same thing? Is possible to observe in Kazakhstan in nuclear sphere that China is pretty important kind of actor there, unlike say in Uzbekistan. And my initial question to you is how Chinese players were compelled to accommodate local kind of needs of their partners in Kazakhstan to have access to the uranium there.
Yeah. So Timur, once again, thank you for having me. And to your first question, I think both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are net exporters of uranium in one form or another to China. So, but Kazakhstan is, of course, the world's largest producer. And so that relationship, I think, in pure volume terms, is more significant, at least as far as China is concerned. But to your second question, I think so compelled is a strong word, and I remember us discussing the title of the piece. When I say compelled, right, it's not. I want to be clear, it's not a coercive relationship. I'm talking about bargaining power in terms of in the economic sense and in the business sense. So to just set the scenes a little bit for people who may not be familiar with the industry. As I said, Kazakhstan is the largest producer of uranium in the world, not only exporting to China, but to Russia, to Europe, to the United States. And that's because its geology is such that uranium resources are not only abundant, but they can be extracted relatively cheaply. So even when other producers have to stop producing because of low prices, right, Kazakhstan can keep producing uranium, even though they have also implemented supply discipline when prices are low. So China is, on the other hand, the country with the fastest growing nuclear energy industry. And even though domestic mining is ramping up, right, of uranium, it's nowhere near enough to support China's nuclear energy ambitions. So uranium from Kazakhstan is an attractive option for China, which sources the material in one of several ways. One, it buys not only from Kazatomprom, the Kazakhstani national uranium mining company, but it also buys from Western companies who may have joint mining ventures in Kazakhstan with Kazatomprom as a partner. And then another way in which China sources uranium is through investment in local mining. So CGN, for example, China General Nuclear Power Corporation, holds equity in several uranium joint mining ventures. And so if it owns, for example, a 49% stake, 50% stake, about half of the uranium that's mined it directly goes to that Chinese company, while the rest it has to buy from the Kazakh partner. So in terms of local interests, there are really two things that Kazatomprom or Kazakhstan in general wants. And one is co-ownership. That's what I just described. Sort of, the Chinese company cannot own, 90% or 100% of the uranium mining joint venture. It can own about 50%, while the other 50% has to go to, Kazatomprom. That is now a law. It was previously a norm that was observed and China has abided right by that norm. And that is not the norm for Chinese uranium mining activities everywhere, because in some places in Namibia, for example, Chinese companies are holding a much larger share of local uranium mines. And the second thing that Kazakhstan really wants in the uranium sector is to move up the value chain, right? So if you think about the nuclear fuel cycle, downstream from uranium mining, you have uranium conversion, enrichment, fuel fabrication. And the margins for those industries are sometimes higher, much higher than if you're just selling the raw material, selling the uranium. So Kazakhstan doesn't just want to be a net uranium exporter, sort of extracting the uranium and selling the raw material, which also exposes it, I think, to ups and downs in terms of global uranium prices, which can go 400% up and then immediately back down when something like Fukushima happens. So it's a very volatile right sector. And so Kazakhstan wants to move gradually to uranium conversion, to fuel fabrication, and China has helped the country do that to a certain extent. I don't know if that answers your question adequately, but happy to say more on any of those points.
It answers perfectly, but I want to ask you about, the future of Kazakhstan in this sphere, and how Kazakhstan is, also thinking about other options of maybe moving in the global chains, or maybe wants to restructure its own energy sector. So I'm talking about the potential, or even already decided future of Kazakhstan to start producing nuclear energy. Would you say that this is also something that Kazakhstan is thinking about on how to more effectively use the amount of uranium that it has? Or it's not connected to that at all, and this is something that Kazakhstan is doing for just the sake of efficiency, and because Kazakhstan has limited amount of other fossil fuels to support its energy system. This is the first question, and also what is your take on the Chinese participation or potential participation in the Kazakhstan's nuclear energy in the future now, since Tokayev has announced the creation of nuclear energy agency, and till 2030 Kazakhstan is planning to build the small modular reactors to start producing nuclear energy. What's China's participation there? Are we going to see Chinese companies together with Rosatom and potentially French?
So Chinese companies, especially CNNC, I think definitely they're competing for the project. But the nuclear power discussion in Kazakhstan dates back at least to the 1990s, and before that, it did have a Soviet reactor operating on the Caspian coast. So for decades, Kazakhstan has wanted to build a nuclear power plant, a new one, and for several times, the discussion actually has already moved past where we are now to, I think, commercial negotiations. But for one reason or another, it did not go forward. So this is not the first time we've reached the point where Kazakhstan is deciding whether to build nuclear power. But the bottom line for our conversation, I think, is regardless of how many reactors Kazakhstan builds, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, it is not going to consume a significant portion of Kazakhstan's overall uranium export. It's going to need some uranium, but Kazakhstan is still going to be, for the foreseeable future, the largest producer and exporter of uranium. So just to give people a sense of scale here, China has something like 60 reactors and is building 10 per year, which is the fastest pace around the world. So there is no way that all of the uranium coming out of Kazakhstan, 40% of global supply, is going to be significantly affected by the nuclear power project. But yeah, the nuclear power project is interesting. China, Russia, I think France, and South Korea are set to compete. In terms of small modular reactors, I remember in around the 2010 timeframe, Kazakhstan was looking into developing a small reactor, I think 300 megawatts or so, with Russia, and to market it globally. But the small modular reactor conversation internationally has also been going on for a very long time, and we have not seen much fruition. So I wouldn't expect much to happen in this sector immediately, although it's certainly possible that we can finally move ahead.
On this point, I want to remind people who watch us online, if you have any questions, please leave them in comments so we can address them to the speakers. Subscribe, like the video, and all that that is important to do on platforms like YouTube. Thank you, Yanlan, and I will come back with other questions about other Central Asian countries as well, because Uzbekistan is building its own nuclear power plant and has also signed an agreement together with during the President Mirziyoyev's visit to Paris with France. France is very much interested in also be present in the uranium sector of Central Asian countries. But before we go there, we have already received the first question from our listeners, and I would like to ask this question to Nargiza with so the question goes, with the Belt and Road Initiative in mind, which new infrastructure projects in Central Asia could become key priorities for China in the next 5 to 10 years? Any ideas, Nargiza?
Thank you, Timur. This is a great question because it reminded me recent agreements on the construction of China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway. So I strongly believe that this project can have a huge impact not only on regional cooperation within Central Asian region, but even broader. And in this regard, it might also rebalance to some extent Russia's role in Central Asia and decrease Kyrgyzstan's dependence to some extent on Russia. And thirdly, it might also influence Kyrgyzstan-Kazakhstan relations, given that Kazakhstan still holds this monopoly on transit routes. And thirdly, I would say it might have a broader impact on China-Central Asian relations in terms of economic cooperation, creation of job opportunities, in terms of people-to-people ties, and development of tourism as well. And another impact is also that by the creation of this railway, China can also contribute to Kyrgyzstan internal railway structure, since our government seeks to develop our internal railways and to connect the southern regions of our country with the northern.
Yes, I also, the only thing that I have in my head right now is the railway from China to Uzbekistan through Kyrgyzstan. Seems like the period when China was focusing on those huge infrastructure projects are already in the history books of 2000s and early 2010s, when we had the Central Asia China gas pipeline, when we had oil pipeline, when There was Horgos and kind of other smaller scale projects of China in Central Asia. And now it seems like not much of infrastructure projects are in the focus of China in Central Asia. I don't know whether it's also the trend for China's global presence and whether or not it's connected to the lower kind of development rates of Chinese own economy. So I want to move on to the second question about, and I wanted to ask it to Eunice. What in your view is kind of a strategy of Kyrgyzstan with the kind of idea of those debt swaps that Nargiza was talking about? Do you believe that it is an effective strategy that Kyrgyzstan can definitely use to lower the pressure from China and to kind of transform some of its debts that it cannot pay back into kind of green projects where China can have a stake? Is it effective? Is it something that other countries are maybe also doing? Is it greenwashing? What is it?
So, from my point of view, this debt swapping actually is in the long term is not so sustainable, in particular from the Kyrgyzstan side, because in general, even Central Asian context, we saw we see that China actually, when there's a discussion in the diplomatic agenda, China eager to accommodate particular major countries the requirements. In particularly, for example, if I have a chance to give example to Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, we saw that in the first period, let's say from 2000s to 2018 or 2015, we saw that China's financing mostly based on debt financing for the infrastructure or energy investment, or in Turkmenistan, in Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. However, particularly in the renewable energy context, after 2018, we saw that due to the country's growing discontent about debt financing, increasing dependence on China in terms of economic terms, we saw that China started to change its involvement, but because of the local country's requirement, and it started to involve through the equity financing. So equity financing is another type of, and we saw that. I absolutely agree with Nargiza, because she mentioned about the joint ventures in renewable energy partnership. We saw that China also used special owned vehicles and joint ventures, and equity investing is relatively as a real investment rather than debt. It doesn't increase countries' dependence on China, and also help to create employment opportunities, tax revenue, and other things, and also reduce discontent about debt trap or fear of the China's debt over the Central Asia. In Kyrgyzstan case, as you mentioned, the debt swap, from my point of view, change the debt with another asset in renewable energy or not different, the assets actually is not sustainable in the long term, because there's a limit. And after a while, this will also increase the fear in the public. Also in the international media, we saw that debt trap diplomacy idea or myth, let's say, how over through the world. But this is also the same. But what Kyrgyzstan do, actually, I think that it already started to, it changed the strategy also, like Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. For renewable energy, we saw that Kyrgyzstan actively engaged with International Finance Corporation of World Bank, EBRD, Asia Development Bank, even China Asia Investment and Infrastructure, the institution, in order to resource mobilization, in order to take technical assistance, and also credit more accountable institutions. And in this context, we saw that Chinese companies also eager to join, because Chinese companies also China doesn't want to also take huge debt or risky projects, because its affect its reputation in Central Asia, in public and the elite level. So it eager to join EBRD's projects, as in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, in same the Kyrgyzstan. What we see in Kyrgyzstan, particularly in the renewable energy, let's say, in last year, country announced that it will also start renewable energy tenders by the support of the IFC. This is very important. We saw that there is similarities between the countries, the pattern. For example, Kazakhstan auctions, Uzbekistan tenders, and Kyrgyzstan also announced and started to already the renewable energy tenders. This means that there's another engagement way or engagement channel rather than debt financing or debt swapping, equity financing or multilateralism, not with engagement with China, but engagement with EBRD. And Chinese companies more sustainable, more accountable, and more transparent. And it's also beneficial for the both sides. Kyrgyzstan take technical assistance, has a longer term credit, more less pressure, and China has a chance to develop its reputation, much better, let's say, soft power strategy. And I think that it's a real win-win. I would say that's all already working in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but Kyrgyzstan also follow the same pattern.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. Another question that we have from the audience, I think Yanlan, in Central Asia, are there any industries where Chinese and Russian investment significantly overlap?
Yeah, so I think uranium is a great example where the two countries are basically both investing in local uranium production. By far, Russia owns the largest share of among any foreign countries. Russia owns the largest share of Kazakhstan's uranium production. Just earlier this year, but actually we saw Russia's Uranium One transfer equity in some of its uranium joint mining ventures to Chinese companies. One of them, the recipients, the beneficiaries, I think, was CGN, and then another was a subsidiary of SPIC, which is another Chinese nuclear company. So this is not always a competitive relationship, even where Russian and Chinese investments overlap. Similarly, I think in nuclear power plant construction, as we discussed before, China's CNNC and Russia's Rosatom, they obviously are both competing for a possible nuclear power plant construction project. But again, here it's not necessarily going to be a purely competitive, relationship, because if you look at Russian reactors that China has built, for example, actually, much of the equipment is supplied by Chinese subcontractors. So in a nuclear power plant, right, there's the nuclear island, the reactor, and the conventional island, which refers to the turbine, the generator, etc. Things that don't have to do with nuclear material as much. So you can't share the nuclear island between two companies like CNNC and Rosatom, between China and Russia. It's either going to be a Chinese reactor or it's going to be a Russian reactor. But you can, for example, get financing from one country and equipment from the other, or there can be a wide variety of suppliers and subcontractors when it comes to the conventional island. So, right, in China, you have plants with Russian reactors and a Chinese turbine generator, or Western instrumentation and control. And Kazakhstan, if it would like to, right, politically maintain a diversified, right, supply procurement portfolio, and more broadly, right, foreign policy orientation, I think that's the model that it would likely want to go for. So short answer, there are indeed industries, right, where Chinese and Russian investments overlap in this sector, but I would caution against the narrative of a purely competitive relationship.
Yeah, this is interesting, and it actually goes against the, I would say, already maybe common narrative that there is this competition between China and Russia in Central Asia, and that these two countries hate each other, and this is the soft spot in the growing bromance of the relationship that we're observing for the last more or less decade. So yeah, it's very important to keep in mind that actually some of the factors of some of the facts of cooperation are underestimated. Another question from the audience about the special attention that Turkmenistan has got from China as regards Chinese investments in the country. I wanted to ask Nargiza and maybe expand this question a little bit on the whole Central Asian kind of region. You have written in your piece and also mentioned earlier today that if we speak about China's debt policy in Central Asia, Kazakhstan stands out as a most kind of stable country from the debt perspective. But at the same time, you also mentioned that Turkmenistan has got rid of its debt and is publicly claiming that it has zero amount of money that it owes to China. I wanted to ask, connecting those two parts, connect it with the question and ask, so do you believe that the kind of facts that Turkmenistan publishes are true? Are they connected to the reality at all? And about the special attention, I don't really believe that Turkmenistan has been a special kind of country that China was aiming. But of course, when we speak about the energy partnership, of course, Turkmenistan stands out as the kind of main provider of natural gas, not only in the region but also, on a global scale. Turkmenistan is one of the richest countries, right? So maybe the question kind of refers to this process. So, in a nutshell, what is, in your view, the reality? Can we believe to Turkmenistan's official that they don't have any debts to China right now? And would you believe that Turkmenistan is the special kind of partner in the eyes of Chinese?
Thank you, Timur. I would say that given political regime in Turkmenistan, I wouldn't trust official resources on the information of full repayment of liabilities to China. I would lean probably to the assumption that Turkmenistan exchanged its gas resources for debt repayment. And as for the second part of the question, I do believe that Turkmenistan plays a crucial role for China in terms of gas resources and in terms of already constructed gas pipeline. And I would probably also add Turkmenistan's important geographical location, given that Turkmenistan could play a huge role in the development of the Middle Corridor, which is now sort of important transit route for China as well. And given that Turkmenistan shares border with Afghanistan, cooperation with Turkmenistan might play a significant role in terms of regional security in Central Asia and broader.
Yeah, thank you. So another additional question that I had for you, Nis, but I didn't ask it previously, was about the potential of green energy in the countries that you did not mention, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. I understand that Turkmenistan, is in a very good position from the energy and fossil fuels perspective. They don't really need to think about the transition to renewable energy in the nearest future. But at the same time, this is a tendency that everybody has been speaking about. So, are there any renewable projects that you are aware about coming from Turkmenistan and Tajikistan? I assume Tajikistan, considering that the country is pretty much dependent on the import of oil and gas from neighboring countries, especially from Uzbekistan. Tajikistan has some sort of ideas about implementing renewable or designing its renewable energy sector with the help of Chinese. So am I missing something, or something's happening?
So thank you very much again for question. So when I research actually this topic, not particular on Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, but generally, I also asked the question myself that okay, why Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan attract Chinese investor or Chinese attention, but other countries is less viable or not? So let's start for, I think that it depends on the country's own strategy, their promotion to renewable energy projects or their intention. Let's start with the Turkmenistan. As you all of you know, Turkmenistan is actually a very close country, very few information about. We have the real data. Well, is there a comprehensive strategy or not? For example, we know that Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan has a real intention to develop renewable energy production in the country because they have a reason. They want to reduce import, as you mentioned, electricity, reduce import of fossil fuels. They want to reduce their dependence on traditional fossil fuels. But they already have a target. Kyrgyzstan has also, and Tajikistan has also, but in Turkmenistan, it's very vague and uncertain. This is the first reason, I would say, because intention of the states, from my point of view, is the relations with China and requirements very important. In Turkmenistan case, this is very vague. The second, there's in comparison with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan currently, there's the promotion, subsidies, tax for the companies to attract or additional the privilege for the companies to join renewable energy in Turkmenistan actually is not exist, and there's no again the comprehensive strategy to attract this. And from my point of view, even the country declared that it has a interest in renewable energy. It's in mostly keep in the speech rather than specific action. So that's why currently I don't see any the concrete project between China and Turkmenistan, solar projects or wind projects. And actually hydroelectric is not possible due to the water scarcity and climate change, but I didn't see anything was also in the solar and the wind projects. In Tajikistan is more different because Tajikistan has already target. It's the intention to develop. Tajikistan from my point of view, main problem in Tajikistan, but in past also in Kyrgyzstan, they promotion or the strategy actually is a little bit late in comparison Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, because Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan has already subsidy, already has a tax breaks for the companies. Kyrgyzstan also already started to provide it. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, as I mentioned, started to announce tenders, auctions for the renewable energy. They started to put in the government agenda, government-to-government relations with China. So we already saw some clear projects with China in all three countries, in Kyrgyzstan also. But in Tajikistan, we saw two things. First, like Turkmenistan, mostly the strategy is in the speech or in the paper. There's no direct transformation of practical action. And the second, even the country want to develop renewable energy, it's mostly focused on, again, water resource or hydroelectric sectors. We saw that Rogun Dam, for example, it's the projects that Tajikistan strongly try to facilitate, find new resource. But in this context, we again don't see real intention for the development of solar and wind project. Kyrgyzstan in past also focused again hydroelectric, but we saw that it's also developed its interest, a part of interest to solar and wind power project. And Tajikistan, actually, when we looked at the media, we again saw that Rogun Dam is the top priority. And Rogun Dam actually is a risky project because of it creates discontent in the public opinion. We know that people have a complaint in this project that it displaces the people. Second, it's require huge cost. And Tajikistan still continue to insist this realization of the project. However, in the wind and the solar project, we doesn't see again the proactive engagement with China like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. However, in comparison with Turkmenistan, we saw that China already signed some agreement with Tajikistan to realization of some solar and wind power. And I would say that when we compare, Tajikistan at least has an intention and already put the government agenda with China, but Turkmenistan not actually.
I see. And Yanlian, I also want to expand a little bit on other countries. Uzbekistan has signed MOUs with Rosatom and is also planning to build nuclear power plants. Kyrgyzstan was thinking also about something like that. Is there any space for China in those projects, or is it something that exclusively Rosatom will be doing on its own? And second question, since you're here and I can ask this question to you. China is present in the uranium sector in Kazakhstan. China is also active in the same sector in Russia. Has anything changed in the partnership between China and Russia in uranium since the start of the war in Ukraine, since Russia is under huge amount of sanctions and cannot really kind of freely cooperate with many countries around the world in kind of as it could before 2022. I understand that uranium export is mostly an exception, and even the US is importing uranium from Russia. However, maybe currently it's not a surprise considering what's happening in the relationship, but still.
Yeah, so I think those are both great questions. In terms of nuclear power plant construction in other countries in Central Asia, I think each country is obviously making its own decisions in terms of how to select the reactor vendor, which is either CNNC or Rosatom or what have you. In terms of the other countries, I believe they are not going for the type of model that Kazakhstan might want to, which is a consortium type, or at least selected through a competitive tender. I think they're just going to sign an intergovernmental agreement, and that is going to be that. And China is not, if I may say so, desperate for nuclear exports. Basically, its domestic nuclear industry is growing at such a rapid pace that I think it's taken up most of the capacity to the extent that it probably isn't looking to expand overseas too much. As for the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine, I think certainly we've seen a lot of disruptions in the nuclear fuel market globally, but in terms of China-Russia in particular, I don't think there has been a huge negative impact. In fact, in 2022, 2023, mostly 2023, we've seen a dramatic rise, I think, in trade in various types of uranium products between Russia and China. And the United States now is suspecting that China might be helping Russia evade sort of US controls. But actually, I think there may be other confounding factors, such as, for example, the impact of COVID, right? Just coming out of COVID in terms of China, that just happened in 2023, right? So it could be due to that. And some have speculated that the recent, transfer of equity in Kazakhstani uranium mines, right, from Russia to China, from Russian companies to Chinese companies, might actually have been associated with a separate contract for uranium products from Russia. And so it's not a very transparent sector, but that's right what we observe. In terms of actual cooperation in the nuclear sector between Russia and China, I think it's mostly focused on reactor construction, right? As I've mentioned, China importing Russian reactors, and it's focused on fuel cycle activities, not so much natural uranium.
Thank you very much. I think on this note, we have to finish our today's discussion. I will remind once again that this was one of the events under China Local Global Project. If you're interested in the events like that, please follow us either on the newsletters that we have on the website, or if you will subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will get notifications every time we have live stream, and you can also watch all of the other events in the YouTube library that is available. That's it. Thank you once again, and yeah, stay tuned, and once again, thank you very much to our great panelists.
Thank you, Timur.
Thank you very much.